South Korea suspended President Yoon Suk-Yeol is facing new hearings to decide on his future. Yoon has been barricaded in his hillside home with crowds of supporters and his presidential guard blocking attempts to arrest him over his failed declaration of martial law. As the standoff drags on, there are concerns that wider problems in the country are being neglected.
They've been coming here for well over a week. Braving sub-zero conditions, supporters of impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk-Yeol camped outside his home, shielding him from the investigators seeking his arrest. Despite broad criticism of Yoon's decision last month to impose martial law on the country, many of his supporters believe his action was partly justified. This college student says Yoon is safeguarding the country from what he sees as the dual security threat of North Korea and China.
I don't want President Yoon to be impeached. I think it'll be too much of an event to actually facilitate more North Korean ideologies.
Are you concerned at all that the political situation right now is distracting South Koreans from the bigger problems the country is facing?
The political leaders will have to find balance in terms of resolving the short-term consequences that we are facing today, and whilst also fighting and having grit to, really solve the bigger picture of maintaining freedom in this country.
Across town, rival protests both for and against the embattled leader faced off. But in the short distance between them, there was hostility, a sign of the tensions in South Korea exacerbated by the debacle.
Protesters have brought much of Seoul to a standstill over the course of this week, but the problem facing South Korea is that Yoon's opponents at one end of this road and his supporters at the other both believe they are the ones protecting the country's democracy. And that means even after this immediate crisis is over, it could take a long time for the divisions in this country to heal.
And the other challenges facing South Korea are critical. This weekend, Ukraine released images of 2 North Korean soldiers they say were captured fighting alongside Russian forces. That came just after Pyongyang claimed to have successfully launched a hypersonic missile, adding to fears Moscow could be aiding North Korea's weapons program in return for military support. But in South Korea, all those issues are currently on the back burner, as politicians and the public remain gripped by the crisis.
The biggest problem is that South Korea's economy is declining. The exchange rate is rising too much and stock prices are falling. And on top of that, I'm worried that people are having trouble sleeping because of concerns about civil war.
It could be many more months until South Korea's constitutional court decides Yoon's fate. Until then, concerns remain that amid the chaos, both the fissures in South Korean society and the external challenges it faces could continue to grow.
James Chater filed that report and joins me now from Seoul. James, what exactly is at stake for the suspended president in his impeachment trial?
Well, really, this first hearing we're going to see taking place on Tuesday here in South Korea is the beginning of a long process, what could take some months to decide whether Yoon, who has already been suspended by the parliament here in South Korea, whether he will be formally removed from office because of that martial law declaration he made earlier in December. Now, South Korea's constitutional court is under some pressure to make that decision more quickly, given the political chaos that really has gripped this country over the past month. And of course, South Korea's suspended president Yoon Suk-Yeol remains barricaded in his hillside Seoul residence, not far from where I am right now. His supporters, some of whom have of course been camped outside for more than a week now. But really there's concern that Yoon's lawyers have now said that he will not be appearing in person for that first hearing scheduled for tomorrow because of concerns for his security. Remember, there's this separate criminal charge which prosecutors are looking to detain Yoon for, an insurrection charge, again related to that initial martial law declaration. This is an arrest warrant that Yoon views as invalid, views it as illegal. And really there's a question about whether with this parallel with these parallel cases that are really underway here in South Korea, what that will mean for Yoon attending these impeachment hearings as they proceed over the coming weeks.
Now, Yoon Suk-Yeol is a polarizing figure. We saw in your report that there's plenty of support both for and against him. Can you tell us a bit about the motivations on both sides?
Well, across the entirety of South Korea's population, there has been broad criticism of that initial martial law declaration. But what's been really interesting to see over the past week, as we've seen that standoff between his security personnel and investigators, is there has been a bit of an uptick in support for Yoon because of a belief among his supporters that opposition lawmakers have been trying to persecute him more strongly. And so just to break down what the key opinions are really of those two camps, the people who support Yoon Suk-Yeol really believe that the opposition parties here in South Korea are too soft on North Korea, they're too soft on China, and therefore they represent a threat to South Korea's democracy. Of course, the other side of the question is that those who are opposed to Yoon Suk-Yeol believe that him declaring that martial law declaration is evidence that he also is a threat to South Korea's democracy. And so what we're seeing really here play out in South Korea is something we're seeing across the democratic world, people on both sides of the political argument really viewing the other as a threat to the democratic system itself.
What is the wider impact of all of this on South Korea's politics and, of course, also its international relations?
Well, of course, it's easy to forget with all this political chaos that's been underway over the past month that South Korea really is part of one of the most geopolitically volatile regions of the world. We've seen this over the past week with North Korea firing what they say was that hypersonic missile test, but also really concerning developments in Ukraine where some North Korean soldiers have been detained, and of course questions about what that might mean for Moscow's support in return for Pyongyang. But really, the geopolitics continues. Today we're expecting the Japanese foreign minister to visit Seoul for discussions with his South Korean counterparts. And remember, this is something that has been a real central policy of Yoon. He has spent a lot of political capital on boosting that relationship between South Korea and Japan alongside the United States because of those common threats they face in North Korea and China. And big questions, of course, remain whether that will continue with these impeachment proceedings underway
James
now.
Chater in Seoul, thank you so much.